How you guys doing today? Welcome to another episode of On the Line, brought to you by Guardian RFID. Today we're going to be talking about dealing with problematic inmates. I think it's definitely a very good discussion. We covered it a little bit before on my channel. I had, I believe it was Gary York and, it was Gary York and somebody else. I know
William?
it was 3 people. No.
Soto?
Nope.
Andy?
Yes. There it is. There it is. As you know, Connie's the guest today. But yes, we had a very good discussion, me, Gary, and Andy. I didn't get a chance to get Connie's perspective, so I thought Connie can help us do it for the Guardian RFID channel. So Connie, since everybody knows you're here, do you mind introducing yourself to our audience, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Connie Alleyne here. I am the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy. I'm also the podcast host of The Fly Behind the Wall and the author of The Cage Was Her Cocoon. So if you have not gotten your copy yet, I'm telling you now, it's time to get it. I've actually gotten some really great feedback, and it's ending up in more places than I thought it would be. So I'm super proud of what it's become and how it's evolving, and I hope that it continues to serve the readers.
Yeah, the testimonials on your books are great. I also have mine, Inmate Manipulation Decoded, out on the market. I followed Connie's lead, working on my second book on leadership, which I think is fun, guys, very therapeutic. There's no time frame on that because I'm learning a lot about myself as I'm writing this. So I just want to, enjoy the journey, because as much as I want people to read it, I didn't realize how enjoying this is. And guys, I will tell you one thing: once you write something, you want to keep writing. It's so motivating. And it's not even about the profit, guys, because it's not. We're not going to be millionaires based on this. It's about the feedback. I constantly, and I think Connie does the same, we constantly find ourselves going to Amazon, looking at the reviews and the feedback, because we want to know if what we're saying can be applied. I mean, that's the key, some real world value. So again, for those that support us, Cage Was Her Cocoon and Inmate Manipulation Coded, thank you, because it motivates us to continue living our dream. Now, today is going to be an interesting discussion. As I said before, I did cover it with Gary and Andy, but I didn't get a chance to get Connie's perspective. Now, when we're talking about problematic inmates, be advised that can run the gamut. Specifically, what I'm going to talk about are inmates that they're a problem, but they're not really a security concern, if that makes any sense. So we're talking about inmates that are a little bit mouthy, maybe a little bit, to some extent, disrespectful, and there's probably some discretion in how those inmates could be handled. Obviously, there are going to be problematic inmates where there is no discretion. The inmate violates some form of safety and security. We're going to go right after them because that's our job. We have to keep the facility safe and secured. These are inmates that are problematic to a point where there's some discretion in how we can handle them. And I think this is where most of our discussion was during the last dialogue we had on Tier Talk. But Connie, right off the bat, Connie, when we were talking about problematic inmates, the first thing we said, and I'm sure you're going to agree with this, is you can't even think about controlling an inmate unless you're able to control yourself. This is not personal. What's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So I think a lot of times, we work in this place where there's this constant power struggle. And I think when we can stop struggling with who has the power, right? Because inherent in our roles as the leaders or as the officers, we have the power, right? So I think it's no longer about the ego, but it becomes about, so here is how we maintain the control, and that control lies within ourselves, right? If we walk around sort of wielding power or acting like crazy people, right? It just doesn't translate well in our environment. And so the more that we exhibit that we have control of ourselves, the more that we are able to actually leverage that control and impose that control or influence, the situation in front of us with whichever difficult inmate that we're dealing with.
Right. I love what Connie's saying, because that control brings about confidence, which brings about consistency. So right off the bat, having that control over yourself, making sure that whatever the inmate says, it's not personal, because they want you to react. That's why they're pushing your buttons. They know they're going to get a reaction. And in some cases, guys, just for safety reasons, they may want you to be impulsive and react as opposed to respond. React is I'm just going to go with the moment and not think about it. Respond is being a little bit more strategic. So when I talk about these problematic inmates that, kind of are mouthy or whatnot, we may have time to respond in a more effective manner as opposed to reacting on impulse. Because Connie, you agree, these inmates, when they open up, those buttons on you, they're going to keep on pushing. As long as they see that it's getting to you, your need to argue back, it doesn't put any fear in them. This is what they want. This is what they expect you to do, correct?
They're actually searching for your trigger. Let me see how I can get under this person's skin and throw them off their game, right? Because when you're cool, calm, and collective, you can think more rationally. When you start thinking emotionally and they get you in a zone where they are under your skin and they can push your buttons, you're more likely to do things out of step, out of turn, out of policy, and you're less likely to think about what are the implications down the line. So I think, just as the front of your book shows, right, the whole checkers versus chess, we have to always be mindful that that's the long game, that they aren't playing checkers, they are playing chess. So if they do have the ability to get under your skin and continue to push those buttons, they can almost anticipate how far you're going to go. And they're already prepared with their next move as you get to move 5, right?
Right. And that's what I said. It comes to really knowing yourself and then also knowing your limits. Sometimes you may wake up and just feel that you're not ready to deal with this day. Maybe that's a good time to take off. You know what I mean? It's true. You know what I mean? Because sometimes, you just have those moments where it's like, you know what, I'm not, it's a mental break. Sometimes when you take a sick day, it's not always because, my stomach hurt. No, sometimes it's because, I'm just tired of it. I'm exhausted mentally. Let me just kind of break away and just reboot myself, if you will. Now,
who knows you better than you? I think that's the thing, right?
Well, except for this author who seems to have written this book called The Cage Was Her Cocoon, who has got a lot of people doing some heavy lifting. The reason why I mentioned that is because you gave props to my book. So I'm going to give props back to your book. But yes, you're right. You're right. Who knows you but the best? You are the person that knows yourself the best. And you know what's funny, Connie? When it comes to dealing with these problematic inmates, for those that kind of react as opposed to respond, they don't realize that you're reacting in an environment that you don't have control of, which means that if I have an inmate that's mouthing off to me, I can't expect the inmate to listen to what I have to say in an environment that's not allowing that inmate to do that. So you could have that inmate being coached by, her homies or his homies, whatever it is. So I'm trying to give this inmate some direction, but he's being reinforced by his peers to do the opposite. So now I think I'm battling the inmate, but I'm not. I'm actually battling what's reinforcing the inmate to kind of kick back that negative aggression. So what I would tend to do, and I think this is always the best advice. When we did this video last week, the comments were pretty much consistent with take the inmate aside. Do not try to address that inmate in front of their homies or their peers, because again, the inmate's not going to make that change, but yet you can always come back, have more control of the situation, and address that inmate in a one-on-one, and you're probably going to get a different inmate.
Absolutely. So that was the one thing I'm thinking is, okay, so I think we all know that the impact of influence, right? Whether it's just other inmates observing or other inmates who's been coaching that inmate, the one way that we can make sure we're controlling the environment is by controlling the environment, right? Which means remove the inmate from that environment where he's being influenced or almost pushed into a direction that may be opposite of what the direct order you're giving. And I think a lot of times we don't think about it's like, well, he should just be listening because I gave the order, right? But look at all this other stuff that's influencing. And so part of us being effective in our roles is really just being mindful that when you can take the inmate aside and you remove the outside influence, you usually do see a totally different inmate.
And to be honest with you, Connie, I mean, there are some brave men and women that still work the yards, that still walk the mess halls, have that centralized area where the inmates can interact or congregate. So when you have an inmate mouthing off in front of that amount of people, and you may only have 5 or 6 or 7 officers patrolling that centralized area, it may not be in your best interest to react right away. Because not only are you taking it personal, obviously, because it could be. I mean, again, as long as it doesn't violate safety and security, guys, so you got to keep that in mind. That's the foundation of this discussion. We're talking about those problematic inmates that look to push our buttons, but they're not necessarily violating any type of safety and security. It's more about our discretion as how we view what's coming our way. So now you get this inmate that's saying all this stuff, you react, but now you have other people you're going to bring into that world. You know, the 5 or 6 other officers that are going to respond with you who, you know, could get hurt in the process. So again, you know, it's been time where if I know that inmates talking, you know, a little bit of smack, but they're still doing what's expected of them, it gives me time to be a little bit more strategic in my response. Maybe go into a supervisor later on and say, hey, listen, come with me real quick. I usually get my supervisor. The reason why I'm not leaning on I just want the supervisor to understand what this interaction is. And the supervisor will, you know, good supervisor will empower me to give me let me have that interaction. But I would like to talk to this inmate in a one-on-one setting, obviously with you, you know, have my back. I just want to address a little disrespect that's coming the inmate's way to see if I can address it this way. And usually when you take that inmate out, and I will tell you one thing, the other inmates see this. They may not see the actual interaction when you correct the behavior, but they're going to see that inmate being pulled out and approached. So they know that, you know what, something is happening. It may not have happened at that moment, but it wasn't forgotten. The last thing you want to do is forget it. I'm not going to say, you know, don't forget it happened, but be strategic in how you respond. There was another concern I thought you may find interesting where there were a group of inmates being disrespectful to a third shift officer who didn't really have an immediate response team. Now, the third shift officer is safe in an area, but he could have went in, which he shouldn't be doing, but, you know, and confronted the inmates, but that could have been all hell because he didn't have enough backing. But I'll tell you something, you know what that officer did? The officer didn't forget it. He took note of all their names, reported it to first shift, and because we're family and we're consistent with each other and we communicate with each other, guess who helped them? First shift. First shift had the manpower, and those 3 inmates learned, you know, hey, it's just not a good time to be disrespectful. And what I mean by that is they lost some of their privileges. You know, we do things the right way, guys, so don't take it to the left or right. We do things the right way, which means that these inmates were granted some privileges, living some life in the dorm. Not at that point. They all got put into cells, and, you know, it showed that one thing is the officer wasn't tolerating that behavior, was strategic in their response, but the best part of it all is it showed communication between shifts, which means that it doesn't matter what shift this officer's on, they're never alone. Never alone. So, but what's your thoughts on that type of approach?
So, I mean, I think that's probably the safest approach to take, right? Because the last thing you want to do is put yourself in harm's way, you know, because the reality is there may be that inmate or those inmates that are running off at the mouth. But I think the other side to that is that, you know, I've been in a situation where the running off at the mouth does start agitation in the unit, right? Because they know that ultimately there will be some consequences for running off at the mouth. And so the fact that there was that communication from shift to shift, and there was still going to be an accountability for those inmates who were running off at the mouth, I think I think that further strengthens the bond between the shifts, right? Because if as an officer, I come to my first shift to kind of say, yo, this is what's going on, and then nothing does happen at a time where there's adequate support, you know, I might not feel as empowered or as protected to actually stand up for myself or to, you know, set those inmates straight, because now I feel like I'm alone, you know? So I think the messaging that was sent from first shift to the third shift officer was spot on. I think also the inmates knowing that, you know what, it doesn't go unnoticed. And there was something that could be done, even though you guys thought that, you know, you could mess with me and I was going to be off on my own trying to handle it. So I think it was really great the way they responded.
Right. And I'll tell you something, Connie, in the end, I think it's great when the inmates see that we are connected, you know, regardless of whether we work the different shifts or on the same shift or work in the same unit. The fact is that you show disrespect to our family. That's something that we don't allow in this house altogether. And I think the other thing that me, Gary, and Andy were talking about was just to make sure, guys, and just to reiterate here, is the response has to be strategic. Okay, because again, inmates do expect us to react. Connie had mentioned the cover of the book with the chess versus checkers. That's meant there for a reason. All jokes aside, is that, you know, we're reacting in a game that requires strategy. So the inmates are able to know that if I do A, Gangi's going to do B. And maybe that's the case. Maybe that's the case. But we can still have some control in how that B looks. You know, there's still some discretion in how we respond. I'm going to start using that from now on. It's not reacting, it's responding, and taking the word respond as we're stepping back, we're thinking, and we're moving forward. So be advised, there could be moments where the inmate wants you to react, and at that point, you're walking into a trap. You know, there was another story we did a while back where I had an officer that had problems on the unit because the inmates kept on challenging his weight. The officer was overweight, and the inmates kept on making fun of him on the tier. The officer, he couldn't identify which inmate it was. That was a problem. But eventually, once he couldn't identify it and they didn't see that there was an action, they thought that he was just letting it go. It became more than one. So when he sent me the message, I told him, you know, that yes, you have to act. Don't get me wrong, you're going to have to act. But with that said, if you watch the last video, I should have been a little bit more specific. I should have said there got to be strategy. You're not supposed to act right away. At that point, he did act right away. He thought he had found the inmate. There was just this huge back and forth. And to be honest with you, it really got nowhere. It really got nowhere with that back and forth. What I wanted to tell the officer, and again, things have gone better for him, by the way, because he was able to eventually understand where the advice was coming from, was that be strategic. So after it was all said, when the inmates were secured, he just picked one. And you know it, because he just picked one. And then what happened here was the inmate that got picked wind up pointing to the other inmates who were saying it. But the key here was that he was showing that I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. But with that said, he wasn't as impulsive. And you know what happened after that was they stopped doing it. They stopped doing it because, again, you know what? Now they're showing that he's going to hold somebody accountable, or even if he gets the wrong inmate, the other inmates will hold that person accountable. Hey, Connie, you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
I mean, I was just thinking about what you were saying, and I'm like, well, that's what bullies do, right? Like, I mean, that's a situation where he was being essentially bullied. And so I think, you know, I'm listening to the story. You've told the story before, but, you know, each time you add like another piece of detail, which makes the story, you know, actually live for the and make it relevant for what we're talking about. For me, I just think that we're going to come across difficult inmates all the time. I think that we as the professionals have to always be professional and sort of dig into our tool chest. So what are the things that we know we need to do when we're dealing with difficult inmates, right? And just kind of always bear in mind that when they have an opportunity to pull us out of our role, to pull us out of our demeanor or our professional disposition, they will do it. And I think we have to be just kind of on the alert that something else may be going on as they're working to kind of continue pushing our buttons. And when we show that we're going to deal with it and we're going to maintain our professionalism, you know, that's usually when they stop, because they're not getting the responses that they're looking for.
Well, that's what it is, Connie. They want that reaction. And it's true. The moment you're able to be a little bit more strategic, the more you're able to start to get control of not just yourself, but the environment. Think about that. After I control myself and I don't take it personal, right? Then what happens here is, you know, I come back where the inmates confined by themselves and we're able to have that controlled one-on-one. Now, guys, just a good dialogue. Love your thoughts on this. Now, guys, if you haven't, the show on the line is for, again, brave men and women that work in corrections. So subscribe, interact, engage, and, you know, just be a part of this Guardian RFID family. It's a great community that really promotes what we do in this profession in a very needed light, promotes the truth. As always, guys, please stay safe.